Faith, and I'm Robert McMillan, and we're continuing our study of teenagers, raising them for fun and profit. Last week we looked into some of the characteristics of teenagers, and today we want to look into our approach in evaluating our comparisons of characteristics of these teenagers. I want you to remember this important verse in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. That's what we want for ourselves, to be graceful for our children. We want them to look at our raising of them as a delight. And you're never too late to do a good job of parenting. So let's look at some of the unique characteristics of teenagers or adolescents. And remember, I use that term interchangeably. The first comparison is secrecy versus privacy. Every child has a right to privacy, but no child has a right to secrecy from his parents. There is a difference, and we must understand that. One reason our teenagers become secretive is the fear that their parents will disagree with their plans and veto their desires. And that could happen. A parent who wishes to keep his children from becoming secretive must be a willing and non-judgmental listener. That doesn't mean that the parent gives up his veto powers over the teenager's actions, but there must be a commitment to hear out our kids and try to work out some mutually acceptable compromises when they make what we would consider bad decisions. What about privacy? Well, when they were babies or toddlers, preschoolers, I didn't knock before I went in the room. I just went in there to change their diapers or to wipe their nose or give them a bottle or pray with them before bedtime. But when they became a little bit more adult, a little more grown up, heading towards adolescence, I realized they needed privacy. Privacy means that I knock before I enter my children's rooms. That doesn't mean that I do not have a right to enter that room. It just means that I'm going to knock because they have a right to their privacy. And they need to know that I respect their privacy. The second comparison after secrecy versus privacy is the loss of innocence, but possible protection of their purity. Remember, those two terms, we've covered them before, and they're not the same. Loss of innocence is not the same as loss of purity. We cannot protect our children's innocence in this toxic culture, but we can help them preserve their purity. Their innocence is directly connected to their sin natures and to the onslaught of the world upon that sin nature. But their purity is connected to their will, and if we encourage them to develop a strong will, they win, and we praise God. Their peers, classroom values, music, social media, and the desire to fit in all conspire to strip our children of their innocence. It cannot be helped. If that were not enough, we have social engineers who wish to change the entire value systems of our kids. Here's a teenager's Bill of Rights that I dug out of a book a number of years ago. And it's even more shocking today, but I'll just read you this little simple one now to show you where we were going. And you and I already know where we got to. Teenager's Bill of Rights. I have the right to think for myself. Well, yeah. I have the right to decide whether to have sex and who to have it with. I have the right to use protection when I have sex. I have the right to buy and use condoms. I have the right to express myself. That Bill of Rights is so foolish on the outside. I hope that you saw it as clearly as I did. Some of those things are almost true. But in the overall, they're absolutely false and destructive to your children. If you confuse these two terms, innocence and purity, you'll spend most of your time with your teens tripping over yourself, trying to get them to go the right way. You cannot protect their innocence, but you can help them preserve their purity. Their innocence will be lost. There's nothing you can do about that in this world, but their purity can be preserved. And you and I must know the difference. The third comparison with our teenagers is they have a Detroit iron mindset, but they have tricycle skills. Teenagers want to make their own important decisions, and yet they lack solid decision-making skills such as wisdom. And they don't have a track record of making good decisions. Remember, we parents can make better decisions than they can, but the problem is we've got to teach them how to make good decisions and then allow them to make decisions and live with the consequences. The desire to make important decisions that are beyond their years is the reason most sex education programs are doomed to failure. Our teens are given mechanical skills without the wisdom to control properly or even understand what they are taught. And as a result, we're destroying a generation. As a child, Corrie ten Boom asked her father a question regarding sexuality. Her father brought out a suitcase and asked her to lift it. She could not. That suitcase was like the answer to her question. Her shoulders were not big enough to bear it. Someday she'd be strong enough to lift the suitcase and mature enough to handle the answer to the question. But not then. The social engineers want to give our children suitcases they really don't have the shoulders to lift. We need to protect our children. A fourth comparison we have is that they're independent-minded, but they're dependent for an awful lot of things still. Our teens want to think independently and come to their own conclusions about truth and life, but they lack the depth of wisdom necessary to make those decisions safely or to make them well. We parents can make their important decisions easier and better than they can, but we do so to the detriment of their being able to stand up for their own beliefs. We can cripple their adulthood by refusing to allow them to fail in decision making. Granted, we don't want them to fail, but if you make enough decisions, you'll fail at some of them. When they were young, we parents were the clearinghouse between them and their will. We had veto power over every decision, didn't we? Now that they're teens, we want them to exercise their will as adults, without having us as a clearinghouse for all their decisions. We want them to contact us and ask our counsel. That's great, but they don't need us to make their decisions for them. Thankfully, if they've learned to respect our wisdom and they are therefore themselves wise, they will ask our counsel, but they must never be put in the position that they cannot make a decision as an adult without our input. The fifth, the last comparison is that they're egocentric yet insecure. An adolescent's world still revolves around himself, just as it did when he was a child, but his center is now unstable. He's neither a child nor an adult. And as a result, what he was standing on before started becoming shifting. The teenager will ask himself 4 questions during his adolescence, and all of them will have to do with his insecurities about himself. But we're going to get into that in more depth in the next time as we continue on with these 4 questions. You want to be here then. In the meantime, would you please subscribe to this channel down below on YouTube? And if you would, like this video. It helps me to know what direction to go. And if you have a comment or a question for me, down below there's a place for comments, and I'll respond to them. You let me know, and I'll respond to you. Until then, keep loving those kids, keep reading your Bible, keep praying for yourself and for your children.